All right, welcome everyone. If the people at the back want to take a seat, feel free to. We've got front row seats up here. All right, my name's Sylvia. I'm director at Bullish Capital, and joined by me, we've got Tausif from IoNet, we've got Andrej from Grass, which is also Wynd Labs. We've got Alpen, Borderless Capital, Jonathan from Coinbase Ventures. Welcome to our esteemed panelists. Now, panel today is focusing on how AI is shaping the next wave of crypto innovation. And I'm sure everyone has been hot on the sector of AI cross crypto. So we've got a few great panelists here to take us through our Q&A of this panel. So first question is, how do you guys see the intersection of AI and crypto evolving in 2025 this year? Maybe we'll start with Tausif.
Sure. I think there's definitely a lot of things to cover there when it talks about, as broad a space as AI and crypto together. I think like the area that, we're really focused on is something that's been pretty top of mind for a lot of folks already with AI agents, right? So in terms of like a lot of the use cases for a decentralized compute network like IoNet, we have a variety of different customers that we've seen who use this for like AI model training, inferencing, fine-tuning, all these different aspects of it. What's become really interesting is being able to set up the infrastructure for AI agents to be actually able to permissionlessly use like a decentralized compute network like IO using crypto rails, right? When you kind of think about an AI agent and how they're sort of autonomous, like that autonomous aspect of it really comes down to how they're able to permissionlessly access a variety of different resources, whether that's sort of compute, whether that's data, all the different things that they need to sort of really exist and survive. When it comes to an AI agent being able to use sort of a centralized incumbent provider like an AWS or a Google Cloud or something like that, an AI agent isn't going to have, a social security number or driver's license or whatever you need for KYC, AML type stuff. So we're really prepping for sort of what we think this future is going to look like with millions, if not billions, of different AI agents operating autonomously that'll need access to a permissionless sort of decentralized compute ecosystem and a variety of sort of other things in the DAI ecosystem to be able to, essentially accomplish this directive.
Yeah, I mean, the AI agent theme has definitely taken the crypto industry by storm. How about our other panelists? Do we have any other input?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Yeah, I mean, both the sectors, AI and crypto, are innovating very fast, right? We're seeing it all the time that there's like weekly, if not daily, iterations of these technologies. The areas that we're seeing that I think have foundational impacts, especially in the crypto space, is so one area is around the foundations for how we expect to see development in crypto. So coding, contract auditing, the generation of these types of core aspects of the technology, we expect to see very different iterations and ways of that evolving. Because first and foremost, I think the risk landscape is going to change when you have AI involved in the generation of code. Auditing is going to change dramatically accordingly. At the same time, developer adoption, which is one of the biggest constraints, is also, I think, meaningfully unlocked when you are bringing on co-pilots that allow developers that maybe don't know that much about smart contracts to now be able to code all kinds of crypto primitives into whatever they're building. So I think that's one area we're super excited about. One other area I'll mention is around coordination. So whether it's agent-to-agent coordination or device-to-device coordination. So we do a lot of deep in-related investments as well. We're doing a little bit of investment on the agent side as well, obviously, because that's extremely important. But I think verified coordination, making sure that those relationships are both done in a way that's crypto native or internet native, whether it's a transaction, whether it's some kind of interaction, and also making sure it's verifiable. I think all of those things for us are extremely important intersections.
Yeah, verifiability. And on your point of coding, I think there's loads of these YouTube videos out there of how people are using DeepSeek and these other chatbots to help with their dev work. And Tausif?
Yeah, I think, so Coinbase Ventures, we publish like this crypto AI stack and landscape. And one of the ways that we kind of like segmented the landscape is like on one side, you have like decentralized AI. And so that was like democratization of GPUs through something like IONet. How do you give users better sovereignty of their data and be able to reward them for their contributions? How do you do, verifiability on chain? And so I think like we kind of seen this cycle of like the infrastructure coming to bear to then unlock the other side of the equation, which is really what we define as like on-chain AI. And so that is where we're kind of seeing like these agents that are being equipped with self-custody wallets. They're being given stable coins to process microtransactions and pay for services. I think there's a world where we're going to see every single client surface area within crypto, protocol front ends to wallets themselves, integrating some type of AI mechanisms, right? Where the end user is just simply chatting and kind of expressing their intent, and the agent is kind of orchestrating that on the back end. So I think like, it's kind of like this natural shift between decentralizing the AI stack and making sure they're democratizing access to very critical resources for developers, and then now building those applications that's harnessing that stack on chain.
Awesome. Andrej?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Great to see everyone here. So the question was crypto and AI, like how's that going to develop together in the next year or whatever? I think the term, and I've said this before, like I think the term Web3 is largely a misnomer for crypto. Like crypto's not Web3. It's not the new way that people are using the internet. It's something that exists on the internet that helps us achieve certain things. But where we really see the real Web3 being is AI. Like AI is actually what's defining our interaction with the internet. The same way that Web 2, it was defined by people using apps and smartphones to access things in a more simplistic manner. And the transition, like the way that the internet's trended actually has been towards like a more closedness, but at the expense of, towards optimizations that are at the expense of closedness, right? Like you start out with this, huge green pasture of this internet that's available for anyone. Anyone can spin up a website. Anyone can visit anything. To like a Web 2 where a lot of the younger generation doesn't even know what a URL is in a funny way. Like they only access 4 or 5 apps and they only see things within those apps. And then LLMs are kind of pushing us in a direction where we go from like a handful of apps to maybe 1 or 2 LLMs. And there are 2 versions of the future, right? One where that's scary and one where that enables like something really, really beautiful. And where I see crypto fitting in is allowing the right incentive mechanisms to create that, more beautiful version of the future. That being said, though, I think that's going to take a while. And in the meantime, there's going to be a lot of opportunism. And I think we're seeing that already, especially with like some of the more recent regulatory changes. We're seeing open source AI labs contemplating launching tokens for the sake of launching tokens. Or we're seeing, actually, I haven't been following this for the last few months, but last time I looked at it, there were a bunch of crypto protocols just randomly decentralizing things for the sake of decentralizing them. And then it's like, who's actually using this thing? And, I think that's going to create a big distraction in the space. And I think it's really important that we, continue to focus on the things that really matter. But anyway, yeah, those are my thoughts.
Yeah, definitely. And sometimes it's not like everything has to go on chain. And for the crypto industry especially, there's this argument between centralization, decentralization. The next question for Tausif mainly. I mean, centralized cloud providers, they've long dominated AI infrastructure. So there are trade-offs because, high costs and then vendor lock-ins. But as a decentralized cloud provider, what are the benefits to the centralized cloud providers like AWS, Google Cloud?
Absolutely. I think there's a few different benefits that, a decentralized physical infrastructure network like IONet, in general can offer compared to an AWS or a GCP, right? So in a lot of my conversations with customers on a day-to-day basis, there's 3 things that kind of really stand out. The first is really on cost, right? When you go to a centralized embedder or like a centralized provider like AWS, you're paying an arm and a leg for access to H100s, A100s, whatever form of compute you need. And the reason they do that is because AWS can get away with it, right? Like they have the brand name to do that. They have sort of like this closed wall, like garden-like ecosystem where once you're in it, it's really, really hard to get out. and they know that, and they charge accordingly. With us being a permissionless system, it's something that offers up like it essentially kind of creates a much easier sort of system for people to be able to come in and actually like use it. I think secondly, it's more about accessibility. One of the things I also kind of notice is when you go to a centralized provider like AWS or Google Cloud, they have customers. There's like a prioritization list of who they'll offer their compute to, right? If you're spending $100 million with AWS already, sure, you're going to be first in line to get access to that compute. But in reality, there's so much innovation that's happening in AI that's, with these early stage, like seed, Series A startups that just need access to compute to be able to do that. By us being a decentralized infrastructure network, we're able to pull in a variety of different types of compute spread out globally very cheaply, pull them into our network and serve it in a way that's very easily accessible to all these developers. And lastly, it's flexibility. So when you go to AWS, if you do actually manage to get a GPU, they're going to make you sign up for a multi-year contract, which can be the death knell for a lot of like early stage startups, right? Like when you really kind of manage your cash flow and burn rate. But when you go to a decentralized infrastructure network, like if you just want to use a GPU for like a few hours, test out some cool ideas, and then, go from there, that's something that you could do much more easily in a decentralized network.
Love that. Democratizing access to GPU. It's definitely big. And the next question for Andrej. So in terms of use cases and kind of industry needs around what Grass is providing. So for those who don't know, Grass is a web scraper. They use idle GPU or idle compute time to do that.
Yeah. You guys hear me? Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Grass is a distributed network of about 3 million, a bit over 3 million now computers. And the way those computers have joined the network is because, their owners installed the Grass application on those desktops. And what they're doing is enabling the collection of public web data at scale. So, at the moment, the scale is around over a petabyte a day of data that's being, scraped for some of the largest AI labs in the world. All it uses is a little bit of your idle bandwidth, like a negligible amount of compute. And the reason this needs to be done in a decentralized or rather a distributed way is because if you try crawling the web from a single server with a single IP address, you get blocked within 10 minutes, sometimes less. But if you have, 100,000, devices with bandwidth and individual residential IP addresses, it enables you to see a more complete picture of the internet. And then, that scales in like a really nonlinear way where, when you get to 3 million where we are now, we're actually starting to see some really interesting second order effects from scaling. But they make it really exciting because it's like, the network has grown by, 5x in a certain time period. And we only expected to be able to do a certain thing. And all of a sudden we realize we're unlocking these crazy things because all of a sudden with more access to more IP addresses, many parts of our infrastructure suddenly need less CPU, for instance. And it's enabling, more types of data collection. It's a large, decentralized, distributed data collection network. And at the moment, like the number one focus is actually on multimodal data. I'm sure I'll get a chance to talk about that more, so I'll stop talking yet.
Amazing. We'll have to ask you a little bit more about that later. And this one's for the VCs out there. So Jonathan and Alpen, I guess coming from a VC background here, we're looking at this space. I don't know about you guys, but I get about 30 AI crypto decks a week, every 2 weeks, and it's flooded. But there's a lot of noise in this sector. And for Bullish, we do a lot of DD, and in the AI sector, we haven't found that many interesting actual projects that we'd like to contribute checks to. Have you guys found any gems or any projects that you've invested in or looking at that you think are actually going to bring real utility to the world here?
Right. Yeah, I could start. So I think that the way we view it is, and when you add these two lenses together, it does narrow I mean, even though it seems like a lot of companies are pitching in the space, the actual intersection of where this type of crypto innovation and AI meet is actually has to be a lot more nuanced, a lot more sophisticated for it to actually make a difference and move the needle. So I'll give you two examples of companies we're backing that we're really excited about. So one is Layer Lens. What we see as a big problem for AI adoption is how do we know real benchmarks from, kind of approximated benchmarks to compare different types of AI models? We know there won't just be one or two major models. We know there's going to be a whole set of different kinds of models to solve different kinds of problems, to have different kinds of expertise. And we need a more neutral, essentially decentralized or distributed way of benchmarking all the innovation that's happening with models and custom data sets or data sets that are already out there. So a network that can actually do that at scale, we believe is going to be extremely powerful. Right now, most large language models are kind of already set up to like over succeed because they already have access to the answers to a lot of the benchmarking questionnaires. So you can't really accurately test these models. What we need are more dynamic benchmarking and evaluation that everyone can trust. So that's something that we believe crypto decentralized networks can actually help address. And then one other area that I think is really important, it kind of addresses something that we saw like a couple of years ago that we've had to like reframe ourselves around. Previously, we thought large language models were going to dominate a large portion of what was going to basically come down the pike in AI. Now we actually think that small language models are going to have a meaningful impact on how people actually use AI for life critical or business critical applications. You can't take the level of inaccuracy that we currently have in large language models and then expect that people are going to use it for all kinds of things like their healthcare or other very important sectors. And that's where we see small language models playing a much larger role. And in that world, what we're actually pretty surprised about is that some of these small language models use different kinds of mechanisms. Like they don't necessarily need large transformer models. They use chain of thought models and chain of thought design, which use CPUs instead of GPUs, right? We didn't necessarily expect that to be one like major area for us to be looking at, but we've invested in a company called Neural Fabric that focused specifically on creating a decentralized network for those types of models. And I think it's true that there's a lot that we end up getting inbound on in the intersection of crypto and AI. A lot of it's trading related, but there are certain areas where we think that there's an edge between those two where we think it's investable.
It's interesting. Small language models. And yeah, Jonathan?
Yeah, I think for us, again, going back to, how I think like how we've evolved in investing into this space, I think early on, like last 12 months, big focus on just like the core infrastructure to enable AI on chain, right? So we were looking at things around like data, right? So we invested into Sabana network that's helping users aggregate their personal data to be able to better train more personalized AI models, right? And still have proper incentive structure in place around attribution and be rewarded when those models tend to grow. We started thinking about like, okay, how do you now democratize access to models, or how do you build a model that is specific and contextual of on-chain data? So Pawn network was one, right? And so Pawn is building this graph neural network that understands the many edges and nodes of a crypto network in the topology. And then how do you kind of inform certain actions that can be taken with that type of contextual data? Commerce, again, one of the biggest areas for AI agents that I believe is really going to be payments. Like, I think like there's so much, if I think about end-to-end cross-border payments, like things around, let's say, automating compliance workflows. How do you do, let's say, KYC in some type of quick, compliant manner? And so I think like that's an area we invested into two companies, one called Ahmed that's helping to orchestrate agent to human payments. And then another one called Skyfire that's doing the same thing, but agent to agent commerce, right? And trying to identify a way to do a know your agent standard. So if you believe, let's say, enterprises are coming to this space, and let's say each enterprise is equipped with its own agent for transacting, that agent is going to want to know who is that counterparty, even if that counterparty happens to be an agent on the other end. And so we're seeing a lot of innovation, like I said, a lot of focus on the infrastructure side. Now, when it comes to the application layer, which is, I think, going to be a key focus for us in 2025, I agree with something you said earlier, Andrej. I think a lot of the agents that we saw early on were much more mimetic than they were agentic, in my opinion. I think that there's a tide shift, and that's kind of changing. And so I'm starting to see agent builders thinking about things around utility, right? So everyone probably have seen some of the recent betting agents on Polymark. I think it was like the Billy Betts AI agent. That's a really interesting like kind of concept. An AI agent that's trained to understand sports markets and is now equipped with a wallet and placing trades on Polymarket, for example. So I think that we are slowly kind of moving beyond just the conversational agents on top of X, right, that are becoming somewhat annoying, to now like agents that are manifesting some type of utility function for the end users.
Yeah, definitely. I think like if there was a lot more personalization within these language models, there'd be so many more use cases and so much more applicable areas that we could extend to. All right, so another one is basically some of these AI systems are programmed with strict guardrails, and they're built there to avoid regulatory issues. Sometimes they're kind of overly cautious. If you've ever used ChatGPT and you've asked it for like doctor recommendations or, oh, I've got a lump here, like what does it mean? It would say, just go see a doctor, but it won't give you an actual output or answer. And sometimes you just want an LLM or a chatbot to actually give you something. How can we design AI systems to not just remain compliant, but actually genuinely be useful?
I can start off on this one. I think the heart of this discussion really comes down to sort of open source versus closed source. I think a lot of the example that Jupiter described with ChatGPT is OpenAI is a closed source company, right, with a closed source model. And the reason they do that is because obviously they're under a lot of regulatory pressure. They have to make sure they're not stepping on any toes, and that's completely understandable from their perspective. But that does sort of open us up to situations where, kind of as you mentioned, as an end user, it could be really frustrating to get an answer that doesn't actually get you what you want. And I think that's sort of a situation where, especially in the last 6 to 9 months, we've really seen sort of an explosion of open source models, come out. So I think if you ever scroll through Hugging Face, there's always like, hundreds of open source models that come out every day. There's sort of like really major ones such as, DeepSeek and sort of Llama 3.3 from Meta that have almost sort of like feature parity with what we're able to get from closed source models like Claude or ChatGPT. So I think it really comes down to, we'll see a situation where I think the market will kind of come out and decide, right? Where there's like certain like use cases for closed source models where, enterprise grade level like use cases. Like I think I just saw something today where Amazon picked Anthropic to power Alexa now, right? Which obviously they're going to go down that route and choose something like DeepSeek, and which is totally fair. But for someone who wants to make a specific LLM for a very specific use case or like a niche that, maybe might not be sort of as mainstream, the fact that there's these open source models with open weights that you can fine tune and, fine tune on like data that's really relevant to you, I think kind of opens up that possibility for the market to really decide where they want to invest in and which companies sort of are building with sort of those guidelines in place.
Yeah, I agree. I think the open source models seem to be winning and the front runners at the moment, especially DeepSeek. Any other takers?
Yeah, happy to take this one. I think we tend to over-sensationalize sometimes the ability of certain like use cases with AI, and then massively underrepresent other ones that are extremely helpful. Your question was, what can we do to make these models more useful? I have a question for the audience, actually. How many of you use an AI agent for something in your day-to-day life that is not coding related? Yeah, so like less than half, maybe a third, right? And most of the folks that raise their hands are working in AI. Actually, all of them are. So I think the point that I'm trying to make is that for the vast majority of human tasks, AI isn't that useful yet, and then it's our job to make it useful. And that's an area where we definitely need to accelerate. And the number one thing that's keeping AI from being useful for a lot of different applications, other than, the fundamental limitations of a large language model. You have to remember, at the end of the day, this is a huge interpolation statistical model. It has a lot of limitations. It's important to understand them. And that's, usually the cause for a lot of this censoring. It's shouldn't rely on this type of math to solve that type of problem. But the big issue for a lot of the utility of AI models right now is a lack of context. Who was it? One of you guys mentioned earlier, you're really excited about smart contract, a cursor for smart contracts. I agree, that would be awesome. There just isn't enough training data for that. There's not enough context for these models to understand that. And not enough of it has been produced by humans to kind of reach that reinforcement learning, chain reaction that we get to when we start to scale data to very meaningful amounts. So I think where we should actually be focusing is on making sure that these models have the right context in the first place, I guess. And the biggest issue, I think, with context right now, most real time, real life applications of AI, is the ability to access knowledge in real time. You've got two ways of doing it. Some of the biggest, quote unquote AI search engines, they're using Google or Bing in the back end. There's two companies that control how you access any information on the web. And those knowledge graphs aren't optimized for knowledge. They're optimized for clicks, and they can be changed based on those two companies and what they want. So yeah, it's kind of this hand-in-hand thing that we have to do. We have to make sure that context is given to AI models both, properly and then also safely.
Yeah, context does matter. And Alpen or Jonathan, and last thoughts?
Yeah, I think Tausif hit it right. I think there has been a shift towards the open source ethos, right? Because even if you look at the advancements with models like Grok 3, and Grok 3 is by no means open source, but when Grok 3 was released, they made Grok 2 available as an open weight LLM. So I think you're going to see this gradual shift towards open source. But with that, there still comes an element, and this is where crypto and blockchain can really play in, is verifiability. Right? Can I verify that this output that I am receiving from this LLM interface is coming from XYZ model, for example? Right? There's elements of censorship resistance and privacy. So look at, certain interfaces like Venice.ai and what they're doing, right? You can still access all DeepSeek and, O1, every single model, and you can get real responses. And your data is not going back to some centralized server. So I think that's where we're going to see. One, I'm very pleased to see Web2 enterprises start to embrace more open source. And I think we just need to lean more into what makes crypto great around censorship resistance, privacy, and verifiability as well.
Yeah, those are all the theses of why we're here today. And that's all that we have time for. But if you want to catch these panelists after, please find them just off the stage. Thank you.